At the southern tip of the Florida Peninsula, there's an ecosystem like nothing else on the planet. Is it a swamp, a grassland, a river? Why is it here? What's so special about it, and why is it important?
I'm Ryan with Focus on the Parks. Today we'll find some answers to these questions. We'll find out what makes this area unique and worth preserving. We'll go over some practical tips for visitors, and we'll give this park a score. So let's get to it. Welcome to Everglades National Park. So what exactly are the Everglades? The landscape here defies easy classification. Many people incorrectly label this a swamp, but a swamp implies stagnant water, and the Everglades are very much a landscape in motion. Let's start by describing the Everglades as they existed before human development. The modern-day park, as large as it is, protects only about half of the original Everglades ecosystem. Water in the Everglades begins its journey at the headwaters of the Kissimmee River, just south of Orlando. The Kissimmee River flows south, emptying into Lake Okeechobee, the second largest freshwater lake located entirely within the continental United States. Lake Okeechobee has no natural outlet, so when the lake would overflow during Florida's rainy season, its waters would drain southward. The landscape south of Lake Okeechobee is shaped by two ridges paralleling the east and west coasts, forming a wide, slightly tilted valley between them. Now you might take one look at the topography of South Florida and think I'm insane to describe it in terms of ridges and valleys. Florida is an incredibly flat state, and the southern part of the peninsula is its flattest region. The difference in elevation between the ridgelines and valleys of South Florida is never more than 15 feet, and often considerably less.
And yet these subtle elevation changes have channeled water through the Everglades for thousands of years. The land between Okeechobee and Florida Bay has a very gentle slope, losing only about 2 inches per mile. Water moves through these lands extremely slowly, around half a mile a day.
Its slow passage through this region's characteristic sawgrass is what led Marjory Stoneman Douglas to characterize the Everglades as a river of grass. And it is a river of sorts, an incredibly wide, an incredibly slow, and incredibly unique river. The park's landscape is more than just grass and water. Once more, small elevation differences are the key. The lowest elevations in the Everglades are the park's sloughs. For most or all of the year, these are essentially channels of slow-moving water up to 3 feet deep. Slightly higher up are the park's sawgrass marshes and wet prairies. These portions of the park are generally underwater during the wet season and above water in the dry season, and are dominated by the aforementioned sawgrass, which is actually not a grass at all, but a type of sedge which can grow up to 9 feet tall. At the park's highest elevations, around 1 to 3 feet above the water level, you'll find the park's hardwood hammocks and pine rocklands. These areas, also known as tree islands, are rarely flooded even in the wet season. The park's hammocks and rocklands support a diverse range of trees and plants, including gumbo limbo, royal palm, strangler fig, slash pine, and palmetto. As water in the Everglades reaches the southern end of the peninsula and enters Florida Bay, it passes through a network of mangrove forests. The park's 3 species of mangroves, red, black, and white, are only distantly related. All 3 species share a tolerance for salt, and all 3 collect sediment in their roots, shoring up existing shorelines and building new islands as well. Indeed, Florida Bay is littered with mangrove-created islands, and the 10,000 Islands region of the park was also formed largely by mangrove colonization. So far, I've described the natural water cycle and landscape of the Everglades as they existed before human interference, but humans have done an awful lot of interfering here. For starters, Lake Okeechobee no longer regularly overflows its banks to feed the Everglades ecosystem. First, a system of canals was built, lowering the lake's water levels and rerouting water primarily eastward toward West Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale. When this proved insufficient to prevent flooding in exceptionally wet years, a system of large levees known as the Herbert Hoover Dike was constructed in the 1930s. With a more predictable lake, the lands immediately to the south were developed as farmland, growing primarily sugarcane, along with assorted grains and vegetables.
Canals and levees weren't the only disruptions to the Everglades ecosystem in this time frame. In 1915, congressmen from Fort Myers, Miami, and Tampa began proposing a road to link their cities and encourage travel and tourism to the area. This Tampa to Miami route, aptly dubbed the Tamiami Trail, opened in 1928. Unfortunately, this road was constructed as a causeway, using infill to build the road directly on top of the underlying ridge and slough terrain, and effectively damming the Everglades' natural water flow. Humans would continue to meddle with the flow of water into the Everglades even after the park was established in 1947. Florida's politicians hoped to expand agricultural development in South Florida and protect the rapidly growing cities along its east coast from flooding. The end result was the Central and Southern Florida Project, or CNSF, included within the Flood Control Act of 1948.
Among the many provisions in the CNSF project, the dike around Lake Okeechobee was expanded to encircle nearly the entire lake. A 700,000-acre agricultural area was established just south of the lake, and 3 water conservation districts were created and encircled with a complicated levee system. These levees allow both for the storage of water and its selective release. Once these projects were completed in the 60s and early 70s, water flow into the Everglades was severely restricted and entirely controlled by the South Florida Water District. Naturally, delivering water into the Everglades was not the agency's first priority. And of course, all these complicated levees and canals had unintended consequences on South Florida's water supply. Since the 1970s, Lake Okeechobee has been plagued by recurring summer algae blooms, a result of excess nutrients contained in agricultural runoff into the lake. Chemicals from upstream agriculture have also made their way into Everglades National Park proper. The resulting increase in mercury levels has made largemouth bass caught in the park inedible and contributed to declining breeding success in the park's wading bird populations. And if you think these trickle-down effects only impact Florida's landscapes and wildlife, think again. Underneath the Everglades in South Florida is a large, porous limestone mass known as the Biscayne Aquifer. Averaging 80 feet thick and nearly 4,000 square miles in area, this is the only natural water supply for the nearly 3 million people in the Miami metropolitan area. And the groundwater here is only replenished by the Everglades themselves. Upstream pollutants eventually make their way into the Biscayne Aquifer, and recent studies of its water quality have shown concerning levels of inorganic pollutants. With all these issues and more, there has been considerable bipartisan support for restoration of the Everglades over the years. In 2000, Congress passed the CERP, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. This bill provides a number of new alternatives for water storage and cleansing. It also includes the removal of 240 miles of CNSF-era levees and the rebuilding of 20 miles of the Tamiami Trail to restore natural water flow. Some of these projects are already underway, but the project likely won't be complete for at least another decade or two. So optimistically, the Everglades may be in the middle of an epic comeback story. Unfortunately, there's also a glass-half-empty argument to be made. I'll come back to the future of the Everglades a little bit later in this video. Everglades National Park was set aside primarily to protect a fragile and unique ecosystem. So let's get to know 2 of this ecosystem's top predators, its alligators and crocodiles. What's the difference? Are they dangerous? And why is South Florida the only place in the world where alligators and crocodiles can be found living together?
While alligators and crocodiles may look superficially similar, they are actually separated by about 87 million years of evolution. The easiest way to spot the difference between the 2 is the shape of the snout. When looking from above, alligators have a broad, rounded snout shape, while the snout of a crocodile is more narrow and triangular. The difference between the 2 is also visible from the side. When an alligator's mouth is closed, only its top teeth are visible, pointed down. A crocodile's teeth overlap, sort of like 2 hands clasped together, so both its top and bottom teeth are visible when its mouth is closed. Another telltale difference between alligators and crocodiles, at least in Florida, is their coloration. American alligators are generally a very dark, almost black shade of green, while crocodiles tend to be a lighter grayish green. There's more differentiating alligators and crocodiles than just their appearance. These 2 occupy different habitats and different ecological niches. Alligators have a low tolerance for salt water, but a relatively high tolerance for colder temperatures. Meanwhile, the opposite is true of crocodiles. As a result, alligators in the Everglades are generally found in its interior waterways, whereas crocodiles are more prevalent in brackish coastal areas. South Florida also just happens to be the thin sliver of overlap in these creatures' natural ranges. This is the southernmost part of the American alligators range. Their higher tolerance for cold weather allows them to live as far north as North Carolina and as far west as eastern Texas and Oklahoma. And this is the northernmost part of the American crocodiles range, whose tolerance for salt water has allowed them to colonize much of the Caribbean, Central America, and northern South America. And one thing that both the American alligator and the American crocodile have in common is their conservation history. Both creatures came dangerously close to extinction in the middle of the 20th century, and both creatures have since made an impressive comeback. The American alligator in particular is one of the biggest success stories in the history of the American conservation movement. American alligators were once incredibly common in the southeastern United States, but that began to change at the end of the 1800s. This time period saw an increase in the popularity in alligator leather, resulting in increased hunting demands. It's estimated that 2.5 million alligators were killed in the state of Florida between 1880 and 1890 alone. Alligator populations continued to decline in the first half of the 20th century, in part due to continued hunting, and in part due to increased human development as wetlands were drained and turned into roads, cities, and residential areas. The species was finally placed on the endangered species list in 1967. These increased protections, along with increased efforts to farm alligators for their leather and meat, allowed wild alligator populations to rebound. And in 1987, the American alligator was removed from the endangered species list, a mere 20 years after its addition.
These days, I'm only slightly exaggerating when I suggest that any body of water larger than a swimming pool in the state of Florida contains at least one alligator, and that does include some swimming pools.
On the flip side, Florida's crocodile population has always been small. In the first part of the 20th century, there were an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 crocodiles in the state. But by the 1970s, this number may have gone as low as 100.
While it was legal to hunt crocodiles until the early 1960s, habitat loss is probably the larger factor in their decline. Much of the crocodile's prime nesting habitat was lost to urban and suburban sprawl in the Miami metropolitan area and the Florida Keys. The American crocodile was put on the endangered species list in 1975, and numbers slowly began to recover. Florida's crocodile population is now thought to be around 2,000 individuals. So just how dangerous are these creatures? Both alligators and crocodiles are fully capable of killing a human, but attacks are rare. Alligators have the fiercer reputation, at least in the state of Florida.
Since the year 2000, there have been 23 recorded fatalities in the state from alligators, which is not a huge number for a state with 23 million people in it.
Victims tend to be young children or the elderly, although attacks have been recorded on able-bodied adults as well. To the best of my knowledge, no attacks have been recorded within Everglades National Park itself. Crocodiles in Florida are considerably shyer and rarer than their cousins, with only a couple of recorded non-fatal attacks. If you're hoping to see alligators or crocodiles on your visit to Everglades National Park, there are a couple of hotspots you should keep in mind. The Anhinga Trail and Shark Valley area are both well-known alligator viewing destinations. The Anhinga Trail is a short self-guided loop, while Shark Valley can be toured on foot, by bike, or by guided tram tour. As for crocs, the Flamingo area is generally considered the best place to spot them in the park. Just keep in mind that these are wild animals and you're a guest in their native habitat. The park recommends keeping a minimum distance of at least 15 feet between you and any alligator or crocodile. And of course, never feed a wild animal, especially a gator or a croc. Fed animals begin to associate humans with food, which is a colossally terrible idea for an animal that weighs 500 pounds, has 60 to 80 teeth, and can close them shut with a bite force of 2,000 psi. The diverse landscapes of the Everglades offer a wide range of habitats for an equally wide range of species beyond the park's crocodilians. This video could easily go on for hours on all the unique plants and animals within the park. The Florida panther, the West Indian manatee, the park's orchid diversity, its mangrove ecosystems, even its periphyte and algae communities. I can't cover it all, of course, but I do think it would be a major omission not to spend at least a little bit of time with the park's species of birds. Everglades National Park is home to at least 350 species of birds, making the park a mecca for birders from all over the world. Of the park's bird species, about 60% are migratory, either wintering in the park or using the park as a stopping point en route to nesting grounds in the Caribbean or Central or South America. This makes December to March the best time to go birding in the Everglades, and as an added bonus, this is the park's dry season, when birds are more easily found concentrated around the park's permanent water sources. The remaining 40% of bird species here are year-round residents who breed in the park. You might expect most of these residents to be waterbird species, given the environment here, but you would be wrong. The park hosts around 70 species of resident passerines, the scientific name for songbirds and other perching birds. Meanwhile, around 43 species of resident waterbirds call the park home. Still, the park's waterbird species tend to be larger and showier than their passerine cousins. And indeed, there are more waterbirds here than there are in other parts of the country. The Anhinga is one of the Everglades' more famous residents and a bit of an icon for the region. This bird is also known as a snakebird for its long, curvy neck which it uses to quickly strike out at fish and other small aquatic prey. And it is superficially similar to the park's 3 cormorant species, the neotropic cormorant, the double-crested cormorant, and the great cormorant. The Anhinga can be differentiated from the park's cormorants by its straighter beak, silvery wing feathers, and longer tail. The park also hosts 16 species of wading birds, which includes several species of egrets, herons, and ibises. This group also includes the wood stork and the roseate spoonbill, 2 rather unique and charismatic species that are widespread in Latin America and the Caribbean, but have limited ranges within the United States.
The wood stork is a respectable fisherman among wading birds, feeling prey by touch alone, and able to snap its bill shut on an unsuspecting fish in the span of 0.03 of a second. The somewhat awkward-looking roseate spoonbill sweeps its namesake bill from side to side to catch fish and small invertebrates. Its characteristic pink color comes from a crustacean-heavy diet, the same mechanism that more famously gives flamingos their similar coloration. Around a century and a half ago, this large variety of birds in all shapes, sizes, and colors made the Everglades a major battleground in the so-called feather wars. In the latter half of the 19th century, it was quite fashionable for women of means to wear hats adorned with exotic feathers. This fashion trend drove demand for plumage, especially from egrets, cranes, herons, spoonbills, and flamingos. The wild and largely untamed landscapes of the Everglades provided a convenient source for American hat makers. A plume hunter armed with a cheap shotgun could take out dozens of birds in a single shot and bring home hundreds of birds every hunting trip. Hunters often targeted birds during nesting season when their feathers were most beautiful. Of course, this left many nests uncared for, leaving many chicks to starve. As bird populations plummeted, lower supply led to increased prices, further incentivizing hunters to bag as many birds as possible while they still could. This mass slaughter of birds in Florida and elsewhere did not go unnoticed and ultimately led to the foundation of various state Audubon societies in the 1890s. Lobbying by members of these groups led the Florida legislature to pass the Audubon Model Law in 1901, which outlawed plume hunting in the state. Despite the ban, feathers were still as fashionable as ever. In 1902, the Florida Audubon Society hired a former plume hunter named Guy Bradley as a game warden to enforce the ban from the Everglades to the Keys. Bradley was murdered by illegal poachers near his home in Flamingo in 1905, a story which made national headlines and brought further attention to the plight of birds in the Everglades. It took a world war to bring the feather wars to their final conclusion. As the United States entered World War I, wartime shipping needs disrupted the feather trade, and voluntary rationing led to more modest women's fashions. The 1918 Migratory Treaty Bird Act was the final nail in the coffin of plume hunting in the Everglades, effectively ending the interstate trade of bird species in the United States. Many of the bird populations that were decimated by plume hunters have rebounded since the practice died off a century ago. And yet this remains a fragile ecosystem where bird populations still face threats from agricultural pollutants, habitat loss, and disruptions to the food web. The birds you see in the park today are survivors, and also the descendants of survivors, so here's hoping that their offspring continue that trend. The peninsula we now call Florida was first settled by humans around 12,000 years ago. By the time the Spanish began their conquest of Florida in the 1500s, the Everglades region was populated by the native Calusa people. The Calusa had a complex society with a series of villages spanning from the Everglades north to the present city of Charlotte Harbor. By the time the British took control of Florida in 1763, the Calusa had all but disappeared. Most were probably killed by the Spanish or by the diseases that they brought with them, but some may have been resettled to nearby Cuba. Calusa shell middens, essentially large piles of discarded shells and other materials, remain as some of the highest points in the park to this day. The vacuum left by the disappearance of the Calusa would be filled by two native groups from the north, the Seminole and the Miccosukee. Both groups built settlements in the area now protected as Everglades National Park. And both groups would eventually come into conflict with the United States in a series of 3 Seminole Wars between 1816 and 1858. The Second Seminole War saw the beginning of the mass removal of native populations to the Indian Territory in the present-day state of Oklahoma. By 1858, only around 150 Seminole and Miccosukee remained in Florida, primarily confined to the Big Cypress and Everglades wilderness areas. A few generations later, some of their descendants would set up roadside tourist attractions along the newly built Tamiami Trail. Florida became a state in 1845, but for its first half-century or so, most of its population growth occurred in the northern portion of the state. South Florida and its Everglades ecosystem remained largely untamed and unconquered until large-scale roadway and canal projects altered its landscape in the 1920s and 1930s. Slowly but surely, the unique Everglades ecosystem gained the attention of the scientific community, starting with John James Audubon himself in 1832. Word began to spread about the area's unique landscape and diversity of bird life. As early 20th century politicians and engineers began to reshape the Everglades landscape, other voices began to question whether the Everglades deserved protection. Their first major victory was won in 1915, when May Mann Jennings of the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs successfully lobbied the Florida legislature
to designate 1,920 acres as Royal Palm State Park. This new state park, Florida's first, protected an important tract of hardwood hammock in the heart of the Everglades. And yet the broader Everglades ecosystem was under increasing threat as cities were expanded, wetlands were being drained, and roadway projects were reshaping natural waterways. There are two key champions to the Everglades National Park story, and the first came onto the scene in 1925. That's when a Connecticut-born landscape architect by the name of Ernest Coe first moved to Miami with his wife and family. Shortly after his arrival in Florida, the real estate market soured, and suddenly there wasn't much demand for the services of an upstart carpetbagging landscape architect. With extra time on his hands, Coe discovered for himself the beauty and uniqueness of the Everglades, and before long he was devoting the bulk of his time working towards its preservation. In spring 1928, Ernest Coe sent the director of the National Park Service, Stephen Mather, a proposal for a vast national park covering the Everglades, Big Cypress Swamp, Florida Bay, 10,000 Islands, and Key Largo and its offshore coral reef system. Coe spent much of 1928 soliciting support from scientists and politicians, speaking to National Park Service personnel, including Director Mather himself, and founding a lobbying group initially called the Tropic Everglades National Park Association. Less than a year later, President Herbert Hoover signed legislation authorizing the National Park Service to study the practicality of establishing a national park in the Everglades. Senior members of the Park Service and Interior Department conducted an inspection tour in February of 1930. Ernest Coe served as a tour guide as these officials visited Royal Palm State Park and toured the Everglades by air aboard a Goodyear blimp. Opinion across the inspection team was unanimous in favor of national park status. However, there were still some legislative hurdles to cross. Some still saw the Everglades as little more than a swamp infested with mosquitoes and dangerous reptiles. Others questioned whether the Everglades possessed the sort of grand, scenic landscapes that other national parks in the system were known for. Still others were concerned that the efforts required to make the Everglades accessible to national park visitors would destroy its fragile environment. These debates would continue to rage in Congress and elsewhere as 3 separate bills in as many years would be introduced and fail to gain traction. A 4th bill was finally passed by Congress and signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in May 1934. Like previous bills for Shenandoah, Great Smoky Mountains, and Mammoth Cave, the Everglades Authorization Act did not immediately create a national park. Instead, the park would only be officially established once the U.S. government acquired approximately 1.3 million acres within the maximum authorized boundary of 2.2 million acres. Additionally, as a cost-saving measure due to the ongoing Great Depression, the bill expressly prohibited the federal government from purchasing land directly. Only land donated by private individuals or by the state of Florida could be incorporated into the new park. This put the Everglades National Park on a long, slow road toward enactment. During the 13-year interval when the park was authorized but not yet dedicated, there was vigorous debate regarding the future park's boundaries. Ernest Coe favored a maximalist approach, but many others had serious reservations about some of the lands set to be included in the park. Over the course of these years, the park was whittled down considerably. The Big Cypress Swamp was excluded to allow for oil and gas extraction. Key Largo was removed to accommodate real estate development. On June 20, 1947, Everglades National Park was officially authorized, albeit at a considerably smaller acreage than originally envisioned. The 1947 boundaries included a little over 450,000 acres, a decent figure by national park standards, but only a small fraction of the Everglades ecosystem. Just 1 month before the park's official dedication, another key champion of the Everglades first entered the national spotlight. Marjory Stoneman Douglas was a reporter for the Miami Herald, an early member of the Tropic Everglades National Park Association, and a guest during the initial National Park Service inspection tour of the Everglades in 1930. Sometime during the early 1940s, Douglas was invited by a publisher to participate in its Rivers of America book series. After 5 years of painstaking research, she published The Everglades, River of Grass in 1947. In her book, Douglas was among the first to identify the Everglades ecosystem as a river, and her flowing prose helped to introduce the area to a national audience. She would go on to dedicate much of the rest of her life toward the preservation and restoration of the Everglades, founding the nonprofit group Friends of the Everglades in 1969, which continues her work to this day. Everglades was always envisioned as a large park, and over the years, various boundary changes and land acquisitions would largely bring it in line with this original vision. The bulk of the additions occurred in 1958 when Florida Bay and a considerable stretch of the 10,000 Islands were incorporated into the park. This act also allowed the Park Service to start purchasing and condemning agricultural lands adjacent to the former Royal Palm State Park, known as the Hole in the Donut. These lands were fully incorporated by the summer of 1975. A 1989 Act of Congress incorporated valuable slough habitat along the eastern portion of the park and largely brought the park in line with its current boundaries. The most recent addition to the park occurred in 2009, adding 592 acres on Key Largo, giving Park Service personnel easier access to its Florida Bay properties. While many of the lands in Coe's initial vision would never be incorporated into Everglades National Park proper, some would go on to be protected in other ways. In 1963, John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park opened, protecting Key Largo's coral reef system. In 1974, Big Cypress National Preserve was established along Everglades National Park's northern border as one of the nation's first national preserves. The protections for a national preserve are considerably looser than those of a national park. Big Cypress, for example, allows for hunting, mineral extraction, and the use of off-road vehicles, none of which are allowed at Everglades. Still, this action did create the framework for the protection of an additional 720,000 acres, bringing the combined protected area of Everglades and Big Cypress to over 2 million acres. The utterly unique landscape of the Everglades would formally be acknowledged by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, first as a biosphere in 1976, and again as a World Heritage Site in 1979. Now, for most parks, that would be a nice capstone to end the history section of my video. But for Everglades, the story is unfortunately a little bit more complicated. Normally during these videos, I like to jump straight to practical tips for visitors after discussing a park's history. But for Everglades, we're going to do it a little bit different. Because while I think it's important to discuss a park's past, I would be negligent if I ended this discussion there. Because for Everglades in particular, there are at least as many challenges ahead of it as there are in the rearview mirror. Everglades National Park has the distinction of being the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in the United States that is classified as a site in danger.
Of the more than 1,200 World Heritage Sites across the globe, 58 of them are on the list of sites in danger as of 2026, typically as a result of environmental issues, threat of development, or risk of destruction in an ongoing war.
UNESCO maintains this list to raise international support and awareness, ideally so that the site's country can address any threats and UNESCO can remove the endangered label. In extreme cases, UNESCO has revoked World Heritage Site status entirely for sites that were unwilling or unable to get their act together. The Everglades were added to the list of sites in danger in 1993, controversially removed in 2007 under political pressure from an official in the Bush administration, and relisted again in 2010. So why is Everglades listed as a site in danger? When the park was re-added to the list in 2010, there were 4 issues specifically cited: alterations to the Everglades' natural hydrologic flow, adjacent urban and agricultural growth, increased pollution from upstream agriculture, and a reduction of biodiversity in and around the Florida Bay. We've discussed many of these issues already, along with the comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which is designed to tackle them. So with a little luck and hard work, maybe we'll overcome some of these challenges. Unfortunately, there are additional threats beyond those that were listed by UNESCO. The threat that gets the majority of headlines is Florida's invasive species problem. Hundreds of non-native species have been documented in the Everglades, including reptiles, amphibians, fish, insects, and plants. Unfortunately, some of the factors that make the Everglades a unique national park experience, its tropical ecosystem, its mild winters, and its vast wilderness, make it the perfect breeding ground for invasive species from Latin America, Asia, Africa, and Australia. Many of these populations were first introduced by pet owners releasing unwanted animals illegally. The most famous of these invaders is the Burmese python, native to Southeast Asia and popular in the pet trade. Most Burmese pythons caught in the Everglades are between 6 and 9 feet long, with the record holder being an 18-foot-long snake. The introduction of the Burmese python has brought on a dramatic decline in the park's mammal species, including possums, bobcats, and raccoons. Pythons also frequently come into conflict with the park's alligators, with plenty of headlines over the years about a large example of one species eating a smaller member of the other. It's no small wonder that the Park Service hosts an annual week-long python hunting challenge every July. Of course, there are many more invasive species disrupting the Everglades ecosystem. The vines of air potato from Africa and Asia smother plants and block sunlight access to native seedlings. The black and white tegu from South America is a large predatory lizard that eats eggs from ground-nesting birds, alligators, and turtles. Venomous lionfish from Indo-Pacific waters are starting to colonize Florida Bay, feeding on juvenile fish and small crustaceans, and competing with native predators such as grouper and snapper. These species and many others lack natural predators within the Everglades, so the only check on their population growth is us, and we've definitely got our work cut out for us. There's one more long-term threat to the Everglades that warrants mention. its unique vulnerability to rising sea levels due to man-made climate change. Estimates for sea level rise in the 21st century are a bit of a moving target, likely somewhere between 1 and 7 feet by the year 2100. But it wouldn't take too much to dramatically alter the landscape of a park like this, where most elevations are between 0 and 8 feet above sea level. Even a relatively modest increase in sea level would flood freshwater wetlands with salt water, devastate wading bird habitats and fish nurseries, and destroy the mangrove forests that protect the Everglades shoreline against coastal erosion and storm surges. With all these threats to consider, we have to ask ourselves just how long the Everglades as we know them will stick around. The National Park Service's primary mission is to safeguard natural and cultural resources for future generations. But how many generations does the Everglades have left? And the problems facing the Everglades can't be solved by its dedicated team of rangers and park staff alone. Its water flow issues originate well outside of the park boundaries and involve a complex network of state and local interests. The threat of sea level rise is a global concern. Are these issues even solvable? Nobody can say for sure, but with a problem this big, we should all pitch in. I invite everyone watching this video to consider what changes you and your family are able to make to reduce your carbon footprint. For those with the means to donate to projects that directly support the Everglades, consider joining Marjory Stoneman Douglas's nonprofit Friends of the Everglades. It's still fighting the good fight nearly 30 years after her death. Everglades National Park is directly adjacent to the Miami metropolitan area, so it's only about 45 minutes from the nearest major international airport in Miami. That said, you'll still need a car to explore the Everglades, as there's no shuttle bus system in the park, and cell reception is dicey for those attempting to visit by taxi or rideshare.
Road trippers will find Everglades a bit out of the way from most national parks, although Biscayne National Park is only half an hour away, and the ferry terminal for visitors to Dry Tortugas is about a 3-hour drive south. But hey, there's more to life than national parks, and Everglades is very convenient for travelers looking for a break from Miami's beaches and nightlife, and it's only about a 4-hour drive from Walt Disney World and Universal Studios.
It's been about 50 years since snow last reached this part of South Florida, so visitors don't have to worry about winter closures.
In fact, winter and early spring are probably the best times of the year to visit the Everglades. November through April is the park's dry season, when the temperatures are more mild and the chance of rain is lower.
You can still visit the Everglades in the summer, of course. Just be prepared for hot, humid weather and afternoon thunderstorms.
The park has 2 developed campgrounds, one at Flamingo and one at Long Pine Key. There are also plenty of backcountry wilderness campsites, most of which are accessible only to paddlers. The only lodging available within the park boundaries is at the end of the main park road in Flamingo. The Flamingo Lodge offers 24 rooms, along with a handful of houseboats and glamping tents as well. Visitors looking to stay outside the park should consider a hotel or campground in the city of Homestead, which lies just east of the main park road and has the added bonus of being adjacent to Biscayne National Park. On the west side of the park, visitors staying in or near the community of Everglades City would enjoy access to the Gulf Coast area of the Everglades and nearby Big Cypress National Preserve.
Everglades is a big park with a decent selection of activities for visitors.
Those looking to explore the park on foot will find a small selection of flat trails, generally of shorter length and in some cases wheelchair accessible. Tram and bike tours of the Shark Valley area are available as well.
Given the importance of water to this landscape, if you have the interest and ability to see the park by boat, you should absolutely do so.
Paddlers will find over 100 miles of interior waterways, perfect for a short trek or multi-day adventure. Guided canoe tours are available seasonally for those looking for a narrated paddle trip. The park's coastline can be accessed by canoe or kayak as well, and motorized boat tours of the 10,000 Islands area are available for those who would prefer to let an outboard motor do all the hard work.
For those hoping to see the Everglades on one of the region's characteristic airboats, a number of private concessionaires operate around the edges of the park, but only 2 offer tours within the national park proper. For guided boat tours, visit the National Park Service website for more information. All right, we've covered the hydrology, biology, and the history of the Everglades. We've checked off some key considerations for visitors, so now it's time to give Everglades National Park a score.
First up are the preservation categories, which grade a park on its protection of natural and cultural resources. Expanse ranks the overall size of a park. At over 1.5 million acres and 3.6% of its state's total area, Everglades earns an easy 10 out of 10. Diversity is tabulated based on the number of resources protected,
With a count of 12 resources, Everglades earns a 4 out of 10. Superlativity rates how exceptional a park's resources are. Everglades protects the country's largest mangrove ecosystem and tropical wilderness, and the park is recognized by UNESCO as both a World Heritage Site and a Biosphere Reserve, earning the park another 10 out of 10. Biodiversity is a ranking of the number of species protected by a park. With over 1,700 species, including the endangered Florida panther and West Indian manatee, among others, Everglades earns a 9 out of 10. Uniqueness compares a park's resources against other parks in the U.S. park system. Despite the uniqueness of the Everglades themselves, the park gets a mid-range result based on the focus on the park's uniqueness calculation, earning a score of 5 out of 10. Add up the first 5 categories, and Everglades earns a preservation subtotal of 38 out of 50. Let's now take a look at the visitation categories, which rate a park's visitor experience. First is reachability, which rates how easy it is to travel to a park. Everglades earns a lot of points for its proximity to Miami's airports, but gets docked a bit for its distance from most national parks, earning a total of 7 out of 10. Next is interactivity, rating how many activities are available to visitors at a park. Everglades has a decent number of water-based options, but misses out on certain activities due to a lack of geophysical and climatological diversity. In plain English, there aren't any rock climbing or skiing opportunities in a park without rocks or snow. Everglades earns a total of 6 out of 10. Explorability ranks a park's infrastructure, in particular its roads, trails, and especially for this park, water access. This is a big park with decent road and trail coverage, but an absolutely incredible network of canoe trails, earning a score of 7 out of 10. Accommodations scores a park on its overnight access. With front country and back country camping and a 24-room lodge at Flamingo, Everglades earns the full 10 out of 10. Finally, scenery rates the natural beauty of the park. Everglades is a beautiful place, but the beauty is more subtle than other parks, and it lacks the grandeur some visitors may be expecting. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Adding up these 5 categories gives a visitation subtotal of 36 out of 50. And adding all 10 categories together gives Everglades an overall score of 74 out of 100. This is a really great showing for Everglades, earning one of this channel's highest scores to date. Everglades protects an absolutely vital landscape, and it offers great recreational opportunities to visitors as well. This is a world-class national park, and if you have the chance to visit, you should absolutely take it. So that just about covers it for Everglades National Park. If you liked what you saw, I hope you'll consider liking this video and subscribing to Focus on the Parks, where you'll find more content just like this covering other national parks in the United States and beyond. Thanks for watching, and I hope I'll see you at the next park.